Hi, my name is Copt, painter of the Kansas Prairie fires. Welcome to my studio. Today I'm going to do a demonstration and show you how I get started with a prairie fire painting. I'm going to talk about my materials, how I get going, and what inspires me to paint the Kansas Flint Hills on fire. For the past 30 years I've been going out to the Kansas Flint Hills every spring to photograph the annual spring burning. Over that time, I've amassed quite a few reference photographs, that's what I use to paint from. As you can see, this binder is full of photographs that I've taken over those 30 years. Once I've gone through my reference photographs and I found an image that I would like to translate into a painting, I select the size of the canvas that fits basically the photograph that I'm looking to paint. This is a 24 by 36 canvas, which fits the horizontal format of this photograph that I've chosen to paint for my demonstration. So let's move on to the next phase, which will be transferring this image to the canvas and then choosing my color palette. Once I've determined which image I want to paint, I find the easiest way to get started is just simply draw in pencil on the canvas. So my main goal here is to use what I call the rule of thirds, meaning that in this painting I have like about 1/3 sky, 2/3 ground, and then going this direction the focal point is about right here, which about 1/3, 2/3. So to start out I'm going to put the horizon line in, which half is about 12, 1/3 exactly is a little too tight, so I'm going to go about 10 inches, draw a mark there, 10 inches, draw a mark there. I like to use a straight edge, get a nice fine line here for my horizon. And then this focal point here, I determined about 1/3 of 36 is about 12 inches. So right in here is where I'm going to put this angle of fire here, where that point comes right here and then goes off this direction. Once I have my horizon line established, I'm going to come in and start drawing in the actual flames in the painting. This takes a bit of time because I'm trying to be accurate as to where the flames go and how large they are on the canvas. I'm not trying to draw it exactly like it looks, but enough to give a reference so I'll have a direction when I start painting. So I'm going to work down through here, drawing in where I see the flames. As they get more detail toward the lower part of the painting there where it's actually closer, I'm just going to start putting in the grasses and more detail. Once I have this graphite in, I'll spray it with a spray fixative, which will fix this, because once you start painting, I don't want the paint to pick up the graphite and muddy the colors. So I also use a kneaded eraser to come back in and change, fix things to where I need to add detail. I've done enough prairie fire paintings that I don't really have to exactly put everything in, but at least I still have to have a road map of where I'm going. So once I get all this drawn in, we'll come back and we'll talk about color and my palette. This is my painting setup. I use a big glass palette. I use oil on canvas. The only medium I use to thin the paint is turpentine. My brushes of choice are usually hog bristle brushes, although I have some badger hair brushes, and occasionally I'll use a palette knife. But basically this is my setup. These are my go-to colors when I'm doing a prairie fire painting. My blue of choice is French ultramarine. I also use burnt umber, raw umber, lemon yellow, cadmium orange, cadmium red. One of my favorite colors is the Mars violet. I also use alizarin crimson and the quinacridone violet, sometimes a quinacridone magenta. I also like to use Griffin alkyd white because an alkyd is a paint that when it's mixed with other colors it helps them dry a lot faster. So when I start a painting I use a lot of turpentine, paint very thin, and by using the alkyd with the rest of the colors, the next day the painting's dry enough to work on. Here is the photograph that I'm using to paint from. I've put out the first batch of colors I will be using: titanium white, cadmium yellow, light cadmium orange, and cadmium red medium. I start with the titanium white and mix it with a bit of turpenoid to make the paint flow. I like to start with the fire and work from white to yellow, orange, and then red. I've sprayed the pencil with a fixative so the graphite doesn't muddy the colors. And that way I'm able to keep my pencil lines. I now have all the white placed in the flames, and that matches what is in the photograph. I now move on to the next band of color, which is the cadmium yellow. The white is still wet, which helps blend the colors. Painting the flames is a back and forth process with many layers of colors, but always working from the white out to the edges. The image may be looking a bit blurry, but that's actually the spraying of the canvas caused by the bouncing of the brush as I paint. I will cover the entire area of the flames with yellow on top and yellow underneath. The next band of color is the cadmium orange, which is painted next to the cadmium yellow. Here again I'm mixing a little bit of turpenoid with the paint and a little bit of the titanium white, the alkyd white, to help it dry faster. So as I'm working the orange next to the yellow, I try to pull a little bit of that yellow into the orange and mix those two colors together. Here I'm trying also to capture the motion of the flames as they get larger toward the edges. Now I'm ready for layer 3, which is going to be the cadmium red, which goes next to the orange. So I started out with white, cadmium yellow, cadmium orange, and now cadmium red. And again, all these colors are wet, so as I work, I try to do a little bit of blending into each color, but still keeping those different bands of color from white to yellow to orange. So now I've pretty much isolated all the flames, and now I'm going to get ready to paint the burnt area of the prairie and the prairie grasses that are still yet to be burned. So on my palette, I'm going to put down ultramarine blue, a little bit of alizarin crimson, Mars violet, and raw umber, which is kind of a greenish brown, which I like to use to mix in for the grass colors. So now I'm ready to get started on the grasses in the burnt area. I like to use a lot of turpenoid to keep the paint very thin. Sometimes I'll add just a touch of white to help opaque up the colors a little bit. Again, the alkyd always helps the paint dry faster. So the other color that I put in there that I just touched is ivory black. So this mixture here is what I'm going to put in for the burnt area of the prairie. A little bit of red there, tiny touch of white, and I like to use large hog bristle brushes and do what I call scrubbing on the canvas. So now let's get started. The burnt area of the prairie is usually black and bluish because of the smoke, and there's still a lot of texture on the ground. So as I paint, I like to scrub and show the brush strokes. So I'm not really painting a solid mass of color. I'm kind of letting some of the canvas show through from underneath as I work. And again, this is very thin paint. Lots of turpentine. It'll be dry tomorrow to work on again. And the process of painting these flames is like paint it in, paint it out, come back and add more detail. But you can see how as I'm working toward the foreground here, I'm actually pulling up some of that color from the red of the flame into the color on the ground. And the key here is everything is still wet as I work. So I really like the sound of that brush scrubbing on the canvas, so I'll let that go. This part of the painting actually goes fairly quickly. I'm trying to cover a lot of territory in a short amount of time. So this is kind of a close-up of how I work. I'm scrubbing, I'm pushing, I'm pulling, going back and forth, trying to pull some color from the flames. And this is just the first layer. Once I get this first layer done, I'm going to put 3 or 4 more layers on top, and all this texture underneath builds up over time to make an interesting part of the painting. So now I'm going to go in with my raw umber to put in the grasses that haven't burned yet. You know, this is very thin, lots of turpentine. Trying to pull some of that color from the fire into the grasses. As I work toward the corner, I add a little bit of blue to cool it off. And then as I work toward the grass, I'll add more red to the raw umber. Here's where I'll add red next to the flames because you get a lot of reflected light on the grasses. And this is the underpainting that I'll put the detail on top of. You can see how I pull the brush up to try to show the grass in front of the fire. And you want all these brush strokes to show, because as you do the layers, it gives depth to the painting. See all the layers of grasses. Now as I move away from the flames, I'm adding more blue. This is a close-up that shows the brush strokes, which will become grasses. A little more red. And this part of the painting works great because the yellow and the white and the orange are still wet, so I can kind of pull some of that color into the grasses. So we'll let this dry overnight and get back to it tomorrow. This is day 2 of my prairie fire painting. The first layer is dried, and now I can begin this next phase. Again, I'm putting out white, ultramarine blue, burnt umber, and Mars violet, and a touch of the quinacridone violet. Here I'm mixing the white with ultramarine blue and a touch of the quinacridone violet to pink up the blue mixture. I start working the sky with my mixture of light blue Then I mix another color, a darker blue, to put in another layer of the sky. I paint on heavy-duty canvas that has the gallery wrap edges, which I paint to match the color on the rest of the painting. Here again, my mixture is very thin and I use a lot of turpentine. I'll probably go back into the sky several times and paint several layers. The reason I do this is because the thin layers dry quickly with the turpentine. I also like to give the sky some perspective, which pulls your eye toward the center of the painting. You can see here that I'm working down toward the horizon, making it a little bit darker, but yet I give the clouds some dimension. Now I add a darker color, which will be the smoke coming from the flames. This is a mixture of Mars violet with my blue to make kind of a gray. Now I check my photo again to check the horizon. Now I'm going to paint in the distant hills and background. Notice how I paint dark next to the flames to make them stand out. My goal today was to get the entire canvas covered with paint, so no more white canvas shows. This gives me the opportunity to judge, to see how things are going, so when this is dry, I can start on the next layer. Now I add another layer of white on the paint that has dried from the day before. Here I'm adding the white throughout the flames from the top to the bottom. The yellow underneath with the red and orange is dry, so now I can add the flames on top. You can see in the close-up here how I'm trying to mimic the action of the flame using dots of white that'll be showing through the grasses. This painting is a back and forth process. I'll paint this in and then I'll paint it out, and I'll give it several layers over time, which adds the depth and gives the richness to the painting. Now that the white layer is all finished up, I'm adding just a few little bits of detail, and then I'm going to switch to the yellow paint. Here again, I'm surrounding all the white with yellow, pulling up where I see the tops of the fire, adding yellow on the bottom parts. This part of the painting really takes quite a bit of time, so I've kind of not really speeded things up, but I've edited quite a bit. Now that I have all the yellow surrounding the flames, I'll put in a layer of red outlining the yellow. Now I have all the painting of the flames finished for now. That means I can move on and put another layer on the sky. Now I'm putting in some cloud shapes, and from time to time I like to test my colors as I work. So I'll get a little scrap of paper and put a test of paint on it to see the value before I actually put the paint on the canvas. Painting on canvas with the heavy-duty stretcher bars allows me to paint the edges of the canvas, which wraps the painting around the edge so it can be hung with or without a frame. Now I'm going to add in the darker color of the smoke, which is Mars violet mixed with the ultramarine blue and a little bit of burnt umber. Now I move on to painting the fires in the distance, adding smoke on the ground and defining the horizon. The red and the yellow is still wet, so I'm able to pull that color into the smoke and the ground. The next phase is painting the big burnt area. Here I'm mixing kind of a smoke color, ultramarine blue, with thin turpentine wash in the paint so it almost glazes. And since the red and the yellow area is still wet, I can pull the flames up and give more action to what's going on with that detail. This is day 4 of the painting process. You can see that I've established the fires, the ground, and the smoke, and the sky. Now I'm moving on to painting even another layer of fire where I add the white, then the yellow, and then the red. Again, this back and forth painting process gives it the richness and depth, and it allows me to put the detail that I want in the fires. I'll now switch to a larger brush to add the layer of red. What I'm doing is putting in the red in the grasses, which is the reflected light of the flames. The yellow is still wet, so I'm able to pull some of that color into the red. I also use a larger brush to do more glazing of the dark burnt area, and I'll put that next to the flames, which makes them stand out even more. While this area is still wet, I'll add some smoke color coming off of the flames. For that color, I mix ultramarine blue, some white, and I like to add a little bit of alizarin crimson. Now is when I put in the small details of the fire, and I'll also move on to putting the reflected lights of the color of the grasses. The mixture I'm using here is a combination of cadmium red and cadmium orange mixed with a little bit of white and some of the cadmium yellow. I'm now moving on to the area of the grasses that haven't burned. Here I use the Mars violet, reds, and will eventually move to the blues. These are the grasses in the distance, and I like to merge those with the sky. As I move away from the flames, the colors of the grasses get bluer and lighter. More color goes into the sky. I feel that the orangey clouds complement the orange and reds in the flames. I go back to my bigger brush to start adding the smoke, which has a touch of orange in it and red. Now I move on to doing the sparks coming from the flames. I use an old fan brush and use it as a splattering tool to splatter paint, which looks like embers floating away from the fires. Some of the final details I add are the long grasses that are lit up by the flames, usually red, orange, and yellow. You have to get all the smoke established before you put these in. Here are several detail shots up close to show the level of detail that I put in the painting. And now there's one final thing to do, and that's to sign my name. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.
Hi, my name is Copt, painter of the Kansas Prairie Fires. Welcome to my studio. Today I'm going to do a demonstration and show you how I get started with a prairie fire painting. I'm going to talk about my materials, how I get going, and what inspires me to paint the Kansas Flint Hills on fire. For the past 30 years I've been going out to the Kansas Flint Hills every spring to photograph the annual spring burning. Over that time, I've amassed quite a few reference photographs, that's what I use to paint from. As you can see, this binder is full of photographs that I've taken over those 30 years. Once I've gone through my reference photographs
and I found an image that I would like to translate into a painting. I select the size of the canvas that fits basically the photograph that I'm looking to paint. This is a 24 by 36 canvas, which fits the horizontal format of this photograph that I've chosen to paint for my demonstration. So let's move on to the next phase, which will be transferring this image